Hi again, everyone. This is Nick Tramick and Howard Chao with our podcast, What's Next In? And today Howard is speaking to the founders of Aifleet. Aifleet is a startup that's looking to modernize the antiquated trucking industry to better utilize trucking assets and reduce driver turnover. So trucking is an area that's really just picking up speed now in terms of technology enabling change. Howard, what do you see that was interesting out of Aifleet?
Well, this was an example of how every time I do one of these interviews, I learn a lot. The founder is very smart, very impressive. And one of the things he taught me was how dispersed the trucking industry is. There's no trucking company that owns more than 1% of the market. And you'd think that given how mature the US economy is, that there'd be some larger companies and competitors, but apparently not. Aifleet believes that part of the reason for that is just the inefficiency of the market and the fact that they can't retain drivers. And so they found some levers, they believe, to keep their drivers happier using AI. And they seem to be growing very quickly and doing quite well, and their utilization rates are very high and a lot of other good stats. So I think it'll be a very interesting interview for our audience.
Sounds good. All right, let's go ahead and get right into it. This is Howard speaking with the founder of Aifleet.
Hi, everybody. This is Howard Chao at Dune Insights. I'm here with Aifleet. With me is Marc Khoury, the CEO and founder of Aifleet, and Jeff Peters with Ibex Investors, who is one of their investors in the company. Jeff will be joining me to help interview Marc as part of this session. So before we get started, maybe I could ask Jeff if you could just give a little background on yourself and your company.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jeff Peters. I'm a partner at Ibex Investors, and I lead our early stage venture capital fund focused on logistics and mobility. So basically software and services that pertain to the movement of goods or people. We're a $113 million fund investing at the earliest stages of the companies. The Series A is an entry point. And like Howard mentioned, we are an investor in Aifleet and Marc's company, and it was actually the first investment out of our fund that we launched in November.
Great. And you forgot to mention, Jeff, that you and I are both Purdue alumni.
That's right. Boiler up.
Okay. Good. All right. So let's turn to the company. Marc, maybe you can start by just giving us a little background on yourself and then the origin story of your company.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had been working in trucking for about 7 years before I started the company. I used to be, after my MBA, I started working in management consulting. I used to specialize in private equity and M&A, specifically targeted towards acquisitions in the transportation industry. And then, I mean, really what I saw over and over is this inability of trucking companies to grow and to scale. And a lot of the reasons behind it had been that there's just, there's just not enough drivers to allow the companies to scale. And so when I had the opportunity to look into it a little bit more, what we found out is that it's not that there's not enough drivers out there, it's that the drivers who are currently in the industry are just not utilized enough. In fact, the numbers, there's a study from MIT that says that the average driver drives about 50% of their time. The rest of the time, they're just sitting. So I had the opportunity to meet my co-founder, and it just happened that he and I had both been obsessing with this utilization problem. And so we decided to start the company focusing almost entirely initially on driver utilization. And now Aifleet, has been going for about a couple of years. We initially started with one driver in November 2020, and we've been scaling since.
Terrific. So what really caught my attention when I first spoke to you, Marc, was just your description of the market structure of trucking, which is surprising because you think of the US as being a very mature economy where most businesses are somewhat concentrated, but this clearly is not one of them. But anyway, so tell us a little bit more about the core technology of your company and what your business strategy is.
Yeah, in the simplest way, our technology, at least when we initially started, was focused on one element, which is how to optimize assets to get a higher utilization, which means how to get more revenue per single asset. That has been our technology from the get-go. And so to do that, our technology connects to hundreds of thousands of loads a day. and prices those loads, and then is able to schedule trucks and drivers in as optimal of a way as possible. And I say that because truck optimization usually does not have a true solution, because there are literally trillions and trillions of potential permutations that you could use. What we are adding to it, though, is the ability of our technology to schedule a truck based on who is actually driving a truck. Because we have learned over and over that just assuming a driver is a truck is, of course, inappropriate and incorrect, and you end up with a theoretical solution as opposed to a true driver-centric algorithm, which is what we are going after. So the essence of our technology is how to maximize asset utilization. And we've recently started working on automating as much as possible of the operations workflow so that we increase the productivity, not just of our assets, but also of our office teams.
Right, great. So there was probably a point in time when you were cogitating over the strategy and what you were going to do with the startup, and you had not yet figured out what your business model was going to be. And there was a possibility, I assume, that you considered using this technology to license out or provide as a service to other trucking companies. But it sounds like you've passed that point. Can you describe your thought process?
Yeah, we're very lucky as a team. My co-founder and I spent years in the trucking industry before starting Aifleet. We both were big believers that it's amazing. There's just so many inefficiencies. You can create probably very advanced software and then license it and sell it. And we learned very quickly through our previous jobs that trucking companies are just not very good buyers of software. And when they do buy softwares, they're not very good adopters of the software, which makes sense. Trucking is such an old style industry. Literally large trucking companies still operate on the green screen to optimize their assets and create their workflows. And so when we were really thinking, okay, this industry is just massive, we strongly believe that that technology can have a massive impact on it. And so if we truly believe that technology can do that, we decided to go the hard way, but what we believe is the right way, which is to go full stack, to do a vertical integration, where our technology is not here to help trucking operations. Our technology is the operations of a trucking company. And so Aifleet is a full stack tech trucking company where our operation is now replaced by algorithms, where our workflows are replaced by automation. And that is really that is the only path that we know how to make work in this industry. And the more we've been in it, the more we understand the ins and out of it by working with drivers and understanding the frustrations on the road, the more we are convinced this is really the business model to adopt in this industry. Great.
Well, so Jeff, maybe you can jump in here and tell us a little bit about what your thesis was when you got involved with Aifleet.
Yeah, no, good question. It's relatively straightforward. Trucking is a massive, massive market. Some folks peg it at 700 billion, which probably makes it the largest market within my space as an investor in logistics and mobility. There's millions of drivers on the road, moves literally almost everything around you. I don't know what's actually in your guys' backgrounds, but I suspect that the vast majority, if not everything there, got there on the transportation network or was in a truck at some point. So this is a massive, massive market that's attractive to investors, right? And the case that Marc described of building a vertical solution here as opposed to licensing a technology makes a lot of sense. That $700 billion market is massively fragmented. It's highly competitive. There's poor driver treatment. Independent operators want a home life and trying to balance that with working. And there's just internal frictions to scale. So it's fragmented and likely will remain fragmented for the vast majority of companies. And also another point there is the emphasis is poor driver treatment. The NPS score is incredibly low in this space. The turnover in a fleet is about 100%, meaning that drivers rarely stick around one fleet for an entire year. And that leads to what we perceive now as the driver shortage. But I agree with Marc especially given my own background in operations research, that this is an artifact not of an actual shortage of drivers, but poor utilization of the trucks. So it may seem counterintuitive from a venture standpoint to look at provide a vertical solution here that might be considered asset heavy. But when you start looking at it from the lens of this is a massively fragmented market with low NPS score, a recipe for success in venture and startups has always been take a market like that and build a vertical solution. And that's exactly what Marc proposed to build, and makes a hell of a lot of sense in my mind. I also like that being a vertical solution, Marc's in control of his own destiny, and so is Aifleet. He doesn't have to rely on sales and customer success and the successful adoption of technology by legacy companies. We just go to the spot market and book the best loads and move it and generate quite a bit of revenue per truck. So sounds counterintuitive because it's a little bit more asset heavy, but really, high fragmentation, low NPS score really requires a vertical solution. So I'm happy to back Marc and Aifleet.
Great. So Marc, I'd like to get to where you are with customer traction in your capital structure. But before we get there, just one last question on the operational side. So how does it, are there different fragments or segments of this market? And how do you dissect it, and what are you targeting? I mean, presumably you're not trying to do everything at once.
So the typical way you segment the trucking overall, the 700 to 800 billion market that Jeff was describing, is into three categories. There is what we call a private fleet, which is about a couple $100 billion. That is when a customer like a Walmart has their own fleets to move the goods. The second one is called less than truckload. This is the smallest. It's about $50 to $70 billion. This is when a trucking company uses their trailer to move the goods of more than one customer at a time. So the trailer is utilized for multiple customers. The biggest segment, which is about $500 billion, is the full truckload market. And interestingly enough, that is the one segment that is the most fragmented. In LTL, this less than truckload, the smaller market, we used to be extremely fragmented. And then there was a roll-up strategy when folks found a way to get synergies from consolidation. That has never been found in full truckload, which is that $500 billion market, because of the driver scaling shortages, where the more you grow, or at least I would say by more you grow, any trucking company about 50 drivers has on average 100% turnover, like Jeff was saying. And so that inability to retain drivers, not attract drivers, retain drivers, is what has prevented this $500 billion industry to scale. And that is exactly what we're going after, this $500 billion segment.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm conscious of the limitations of our time. So let me just jump to, how far have you gotten, Marc, in terms of your customer traction? Where are you with your rollout?
What's interesting in trucking is that the massive fragmentation means that for most companies, there's almost unlimited demand. The largest trucking company has 1% market share. So it just tells you a little bit of how vast the demand is relative to the fragmentation of the supply. The way we consider our customers to be our drivers. They are the ones we need to actually grow the company. They are traditionally the hardest part of the industry to create loyalty with. And so the drivers is who we consider to be our customers. Today, we just exceeded about 100 drivers. That places us as actually one of the largest, interestingly enough, one of the largest trucking companies in the country. We're now in the top 0.1% largest companies. And where we are is the loyalty and the brand that we are creating with our drivers is what we are the most exciting about. Jeff was saying that the average NPS in trucking is very low. It's zero. The average in trucking is actually zero. At Aifleet, our NPS is 80, and it reflects that over 50% of any driver who we've ever hired has come from referrals. And so the majority of our growth to date, and we've grown about 4x year over year right now, has come actually from word of mouth and from our drivers just referring their friends and folks they meet on the road.
So another metric is turnover. What's your turnover rate?
It's about 12% compared to 100% in the industry. And any driver who's left Aifleet in the last year has asked to come back.
That's terrific. Before we get to capital, so maybe you can just say a little bit too about, there's a lot of talk about how autonomy is going to hit trucking first before just about anything else. So how does your roadmap deal with autonomy? I mean, you're focused on drivers, but autonomy is about, supposedly addressing the driver shortage problem.
Yeah, there's one very important point about autonomy, which is the scheduling problem, which is Aifleet's specialty, addresses autonomy as well. So what an autonomous truck does in the simplest way, of course, is that it drives all the time. So you eliminate the barrier of a human needing to take a break. The corresponding that actually exists today is when you put two drivers in one truck, because they can then drive all the time. So just saying why scheduling is so important, trucking companies who operate entirely what we call those team drivers currently generate a lower revenue per truck than what Aifleet generates with one driver in the truck. So again, the scheduling ability is actually very, very critical. So that's the first point. The second point is, even folks at the autonomous vehicle companies, they always say it's not going to be a flip of a switch, right? It's going to be progressive, meaning if we all really believe it will come, and of course we believe in a very, technologically advanced future when this is a very big possibility, it's not going to come where suddenly there are autonomous trucks. It's going to come where you could have an autonomous truck in Arizona, and then the second it crosses the boundary to California or to New Mexico, you need to potentially have a driver on the seat. That ability to schedule an autonomous truck to fit a driver who meets that truck with the right hours of service, meaning when a driver can actually drive at the same time as the truck arrives, that scheduling opportunity is exactly the problem that we are solving today in the current full truckload industry. So scheduling, whether it's also how the hours of a driver change from going from state to state based on the level of autonomy, that is what Aifleet specializes about. So it's actually, we're very excited about the future. We still think there's a very big role for the current business model to play, but we are, part of our algorithms is actually preparing for a future, no matter what it looks like.
Yeah, just to elaborate a little bit further, basically re-summarize, our technology allows trucks to get more revenue. And at the end of the day, if you have an autonomous truck, you're trying to maximize revenue, and it would fit very well into what we're trying to do. Furthermore, where our forte is currently is in the spot market, where you really don't know where the next load is coming from. We're just looking for the best loads in order to maximize revenue. And I think that's going to be the very long tail for an autonomous future. And that's a multi-decadal sort of project to see if autonomy can even address that. Autonomy is much better suited for kind of predictable back and forth trips, more of the contracted freight, where our forte currently is the spot market. But either way, we can get better revenue per truck. Why wouldn't you want to use our technology to get more revenue for your autonomous truck?
Yeah, okay, great. So last subject, capital formation. So, your capital needs are different from a typical software tech startup, right? I mean, you're planning to basically own all your trucks or lease them and run them. So tell us about what your capital history is and what your plans are, Marc.
So our last round was November 2021. This is when we raised our $21 million Series A. What we found, really historically and total at the company, we've raised about 24 million so far, including our seed round, is that we can be very capital efficient and grow our revenue. And so today we still have pretty good runway from our Series A, and however, we're approaching about 30 million in annualized revenue. And so we are certainly learning to be extremely efficient in terms of how to utilize capital to acquire assets, be it from leasing them, renting them, or any other way to actually stay not too asset heavy. And second, utilizing our technology to keep increasing the revenue to allow us to, of course, continue growing our business without actually needing a ton of capital. We are right now working with Jeff and the rest of our investors to review when would be the best time for us to go raise our next round. But we're very comfortable with the model of utilizing capital to grow asset light to medium asset, I would say, while continuing to generate significant revenue that allows us to continue growing.
Great. Well, Jeff, I'm going to let you have your last word. Is anything you want to add or ask before we close it out?
No, just harp on the last point. When you look at capital efficiency, yeah, it's typically argued that, you know, doing what we're doing, making a vertical solution is more capital intense. But when you look at amount invested capital to actually outcome and revenue, which Marc cited of being approaching 30 million in annualized revenue, that's pretty good numbers when you look at almost any other software company that's raised hundreds of millions of dollars and really don't have nearly as much revenue to show for it. So Marc's done an incredible job of being capital efficient within this particular space. And, you know, I think as a parting thought, I'm personally very excited to be part of Aifleet in a small way, and Marc's been excellent at executing. And honestly, I was talking with internally yesterday with the rest of my team, and I think most of us agree, if not all of us agree, that Aifleet could be the largest trucking company. There's nothing really that is stopping us from doing so other than time.
Terrific. Very exciting. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Howard.